Let me again thank you all for your patience. We're trying to work with a few issues here with traffic coming into this area, and of course the parade just ending. But we're going to get this all together very, very shortly. In the meantime, my name is Jim Stowe. I'm Director of the Office of Human Rights. And I do want to take this opportunity while we have a little bit of a lull here until we get going to recognize a few folks. And if I don't get everybody, so I need some help if I'm missing anybody in the audience, elected officials and so forth. So I do want to recognize our chair and vice chair and commission members from the Human Rights Commission. Chair England, Vice Chair Dark, and then Commissioner Freeman. I mentioned also Commissioner Lufjam as well. And she's in the back there, those two. So again, thank you all for being here. Did I miss any of our commission members who are here? All right, very, very good. Appreciate you all being here and your support. Also, I see my boss coming here as well, so all good. We're all good. All good. Okay. Okay. My job again is to say welcome. We're glad that you're here. This is in the series, and I'm sure others of the commission members will talk about this when they're able to be before you. In the series of activities going on throughout the month of November. November is our reconciliation month, and throughout the month of November we've had a number of activities, and this is one more of them. Our last activity will be on the 24th of this month. It'll be at Black Rock Center for the Arts, and we'll be doing an actual screening, and we've seen several of those around the community, on No Back Seat on the Merry-Go-Round. Again, a historical perspective of Glen Echo Park and the issue of public accommodations that came to Montgomery County. And so I look forward then to have you all come out for that. Be at 7 o'clock at Black Rock. And so that will end our November activities in terms of those we've got lined up going forward. So we invite you to come out to that activity as well. It's a marvelous, marvelous documentary as it goes that has occurred here in Montgomery County. You will inevitably see some folks that you might know. How many of you actually know the story of the summer of 1960? It was called the Summer of Change. Okay, I see a few hands. They went kind of halfway up, so I'm not sure you were there, or you thought you were there, or that you think you know, or you don't know. So let me try that again. How many actually know the story that goes behind that? Okay, and their hands went up just a little bit further, so I think the people know what I'm talking about. So I appreciate that. But yeah, it is a marvelous, marvelous opportunity to sort of understand what took place many, many years ago, but still has profound impact on where we are today. And so I am always amazed at time and history. And some people say that if we don't, in fact, recall it, we are destined to repeat it. But it seems like it repeats itself anyway. And so we need to find ways that we might be able then to learn from that history and hopefully move to a different place. So today is our opportunity to do that. And so looking at the issue of reconciliation, as you're going to find out throughout this afternoon, it is indeed a very, very difficult thing to do. I'm not so sure we've ever been really successful at doing it, but the hope would be then that we learn today a little bit about Montgomery County and how we might then move our needle, if you will, toward being more successful. And so that is a little bit about what we're about today. Again, I'll make sure that any, again, elected officials in the room. I did see Councilmember Lorianne Sales. Make sure, there she is right there, recognize her. Anyone else in the room? There's a current elected official. I know I have someone in the room who's trying to become a current elected official. Oh my goodness gracious, my colleague. Again, Delegate Charlotte Crutchfield I think District number 19 is also in the room, and she's agreed to help us with this panel discussion today. So I want to thank Delegate Crutchfield for being here as well. I think I've got everybody. Okay, all right. Now my next task is to bring to the stage, again, the leader of this county, and has been doing so for 2 terms almost. And before that, having served in county council for nearly 15 years, and before that, having done a similar kind of role in Tacoma Park. And as he was doing that, teaching in one of our elementary schools for almost 17 years, or just a little bit more than that, I believe. So he's someone who has certainly been not only immersed in the community, and not only a part of the community, but has endeavored to do something about the well-being and uplift of the community. And I'm pleased to work for him and all of us who are in that particular category of employees of Montgomery County. We all feel, again, an opportunity to do something good for all of us who live here. And I think that's so important. I'm pleased to have you again to hopefully greet and with enthusiasm our county executive, Mark Elrich.
How you doing?
Fine, so you doing?
You good? You feeling okay? Good, good, good. How is everybody? Good. So I guess I'm going to start by talking about a few things that I did are, I think, have been of great interest to me, and I think are of interest to all of you. One thing I've tried to do is we talk about reconciliation in this community is talking about what actually happened in Montgomery County. It is easier to have a conversation saying we want to talk about reconciliation than it is to talk about history, because history sometimes makes people squirm. And Jim's referring to, the events around Glen Echo and the integration of Glen Echo. The history goes deeper than that. After the Civil War, the black population of Montgomery County was about 30% of the people who lived here. And it makes sense because of the slave population that was in Montgomery County. This was a slave state. Most of the place was covered with plantations, with slaves. Right after the war, some black families, and there were all these communities around Montgomery County that were created by black families who were able to buy parcels of land from the landowners as they broke them up. And so there are, I think, 90 or more communities that have their historic roots in land that was acquired right after the Civil War. After a while, the white folk, probably not terribly fond of seeing this, began putting covenants on almost all the property in Montgomery County. So Montgomery County was covered with racial covenants that banned anybody from selling or renting to a black or a Jew. And then I've seen covenants where they list other ethnic groups that you also can't rent or sell to. And those covenants persisted till 1967. So the result of that, and think about it, if you're limited to the few farms or the 80 communities that got created initially, and none of them were massive sprawling estates, they divided them up among their members, every generation of kids has to share the land that was owned by the previous generation of families. And you could only divide up a farm so many times until there's nothing left of the farm that's economically viable to farm. And so many black families had to send their kids out of Montgomery County if they were going to have a future anywhere, because you not only couldn't live here, you couldn't work here. So the discrimination was very intense, and it led to the displacement of a lot of people. So by 1960, the black population of the county was somewhere between 3.5% and 4%. So it dramatically declined. And the covenants kept people from being able to move into the county. Before that, there was a Supreme Court decision that had actually said the covenants were unenforceable, but they continued to be enforced in Montgomery County, and it wasn't until '67 when the county passed legislation outlawing the enforcement of the covenants. So this is kind of like the first turning point in Montgomery County with the covenants being gone. Immediately, black families came here, and by the way, they wanted to buy homes too. And contrary to what some people want you to believe, single-family zoning was not created to keep people out. Single-family zoning predated it. It was the covenants that kept people out. And once the covenants were dropped, you start to see black families beginning to settle in parts of Montgomery County where they could afford to settle. And for many of them, it's like, I would say my family was in the same economic status. My father was a postal clerk. My mother was a waitress. We lived in Northwest Washington by Coolidge High School. We found a neighborhood where the housing price for a new house was $21,000 and the monthly payment was $122, and that was affordable to a lot of lower scale government workers like my father who could actually find housing in Montgomery County. You're not going to be able to do that again today. That kind of housing for that income group no longer is produced by people who develop property here in Montgomery County. So people began moving in. They began having the opportunity to live in apartments. The next two obstacles were realtors and banks, because realtors would systematically steer black people away from property, and banks would systematically find ways not to make loans to black people, so they couldn't buy the property even if they wanted to buy the property. The first thing to break was the realtors. The last thing to break was the banks, and people would argue the banks haven't completely broken. The issue of redlining and differential access to mortgages is an ongoing story in Montgomery County, and people talk about this. It's unclear how deep that is. It's certainly far less than it used to be, but it was one of the last practices to really be pushed out. So those are important things you have to have for context of Montgomery County. And if you wonder why, what happened in 1967 and the growth of the county, when D.C. integrated its schools, and I started school in D.C. in '54, when D.C. integrated its schools, it led to white flight out of D.C. Because, frankly, you had a white population that could not fathom how their kids were going to go to school with black kids, and when they knew the schools were integrating, they moved out. Why did they come to Montgomery County? Because the realtors advertised Montgomery County is still segregated and you're still safe. So we actually pitched ourselves as a segregated community. That's part of our history. And you can't understand Montgomery County if you don't understand that part of our history. So those are things I think that, impact us contemporaneously. I went to middle school, what's called junior high school at Montgomery Hills Junior High. And in '62, we had a civil rights debate in my civics class. The pro side was what you'd expect on civil rights. The con side was that blacks represented an inferior species, and they did not use the word blacks, represented an inferior species incapable of taking care of themselves and who needed to be controlled. And that you could say in a classroom in Montgomery County in 1962, and the teachers would not correct you. It was just another opinion. And, we're a great society and everybody's allowed to have an opinion. And that was just an opinion. What it was poison. And I think about the people I grew up with. I was fortunate. My parents were very progressive. We would say back then, left wing. And I was raised in a household that believed in equality and civil rights. I remember the 1956 Hadley-Stevenson election, and I'm 7 years old at that point. And my parents said, you always vote for the person with the best civil rights record. So that's what I came out of. But I knew that most of my peers did not come out of an environment like that. And I think about the long-term effect of being raised in what's a racist environment, because when you're a kid, this appears to be perfectly normal. And your beliefs are reinforced by your families, and frankly, most religious institutions at the time. This was insidious. And the impact on children growing up usually means they grow up to be adults who carry forward those same ideas. Racism, like other forms of hatred, ethnic hatreds, of, why we hate groups of people, is deeply embedded. And when you raise young children to believe it, and there are no countervailing forces in society that say, I know you were raised that way, but that's really crazy and that's not really true, there's not much to turn a person around. And that's what we struggle with. We struggle with the children of those children, because their parents, if they grew up with those views, were pretty sure going to pass them down to their kids. Maybe not as overtly and directly, because what was accepted in common culture was a little bit more civility was expected, but it doesn't mean the parents don't pass down how they look at the world. It would be unrealistic to think that they suddenly all became enlightened and did that. And I say that because you wonder why we deal with so many people today in American society, 160 years past the end of the Civil War, who are still fighting the Civil War and think they were on the wrong side of the Civil War losing, and that they were right in thinking they should have been able to control the population of people the black population in this country. Frightening thought, but I think we all have to think about how we got in this mess. This mess is not a good mess. Other incidents that are of note in Montgomery County, 3 lynchings in Montgomery County. Mr. George Peck, Mr. John Diggs Dorsey, and Mr. Sidney Randolph. 3 lynchings, murders by a mob of white people, 3 mobs of white people, that never got prosecuted and never got rectified and leave a stain on the county that, we have memorialized to this day. So I say all that because I think this is a serious topic. I don't talk about this topic lightly, in case you haven't noticed. It impacted me growing up and kind of shaped how I look at the world because it was the most troubling thing. The civil rights struggle, which blew up in the 60s, was the most existential crisis for a young kid coming of age like me who had some political consciousness to have to deal with and think about what kind of world do I live in. But ultimately, and I think this is important, we all have to ask, we can dwell on what world we live in. The question is, what do we do about it? And how do we begin to rectify it? So the kind of things that I've tried to do over my time in office have been to try to make a difference and change the narrative. So talking openly about what happened is something I think is important. It may make people uncomfortable sometimes, but it is what it is, and we just need to acknowledge it. And I think that's an important part of reconciliation, is owning what you've done. Doesn't mean you're guilty of it. The European immigrants who came here walked into a society that was already created that way. And I remind people, every immigrant group that came to the United States, except for Protestants from England, and that's true, every other group, Irish, Scottish, every country in Europe, any country in South America, Asia, anybody who came here faced discrimination, efforts to ghettoize, and efforts to deny them the same rights and opportunities that everybody else had. All these other groups have integrated into American society, more or less. The only group we seem to impossible to fully integrate into American society is the black community. This is something that is a bit of a curse because we made room for everyone. We pride ourselves in Montgomery County about being the most diverse county in the country, religiously and culturally. And yet, this one thing lingers, and I think it lingers because we, as a society, have never honestly talked about it. We've never had a president, regardless of the president's race, who was willing to say, we are going to talk about this now because this is the major barrier to our society moving forward in a way that all of us are pulling in the same direction and we're not distracted by these kinds of racial battles, that we're singularly focused on building a society that includes everyone, instead of figuring out how do we just defend the empires and rules and strictures that have already been created. So that's what brings me to do the things I do. The time I've been county executive, we've created an Office of Racial Justice. We do real work. They actually analyze our budgets. They will point out to us, your capital projects seem to be focused on certain parts of the county, and they're not equally distributed across everybody in the county. These are conversations that happen. Our department heads are asked to be accountable for who does your project serve, so that we're not repeating what happened in the past. And I'll give Ike Leggett credit. I know Ike's not here, but when I was on the council, and he came in and I came in at the same time, he announced to us that he was going to change the staging of the recreation center renovations in Montgomery County, and he was going to pull forward all the black recreation centers and he was going to fix them and restore them. And he was going to do that out of cycle because we had continued to build beautiful new rec centers like in Friendship Heights and other parts of the county, while rec centers in black communities languished, sometimes falling apart. People would talk about, well, the wall no longer connects to the floor. This building's in really bad shape. And we had never prioritized the black community. I came in and told the council, this is what we're going to do, and we did it. And I give Ike a lot of credit for doing that because I can assure you it jarred some people who thought their projects were next, and they learned that their projects weren't going to be next. There were some other things that we were going to do to address equity in this county, and I give him a lot of credit for doing that, and it is something that, has stuck with me as I move through. So the racial equity and justice stuff is important. We've tried to decriminalize things in Montgomery County so we don't send so many people to jail. So we have finally got 7 teams in Montgomery County who, if a person is struggling with a mental health issue, an alcohol or drug issue, they may be first greeted by a mental health worker instead of by a police officer, and try to take people from the criminal justice system and put them in the mental health system, which is where people who have issues belong. They do not need a criminal record. And I want to point out to folks that we don't think of it this way, but a criminal record is sort of like a life sentence. It's not, even if it's a 6-month sentence, technically, it's a life sentence. Because if you go to get a job, or you want to get a job, and somebody pulls your criminal record, there's a chance they're not going to hire you because you have a criminal record. And if you want to rent an apartment and a landlord pulls your record and they say you have a criminal record, there's a chance that you're not going to get housing because of your criminal record. So if you're going to give people criminal records, you ought to be really careful about who you give them to and make sure you don't saddle people who what you really want to do is reform and bring back into society, not saddle them with something that'll make it impossible to reintegrate them into society. So that's something we've pushed on. We've got resources we put into it. This is really important to us. We continue to do affordable housing work. The county is taking the lead. We're not settling for deals with developers where the county gets a small portion of the units and and they make a lot of money. We're actually doing projects entirely ourselves with the intentionality of making sure we produce more affordable housing in the county. And I've been very outspoken about the rezoning in the county, whether it's Tacoma Park or University Boulevard corridor, whether it's the Thrive general plan. All 3 of those plans were evaluated for racial equity. All 3 of them were deemed to be a tad racist, and all 3 of them were not changed. So you got racial equity policies in the county. You have it analyzed by people who say this is problematic, and then you proceed to do what was problematic. This is not a good solution to our problems. So the most recent one on University Boulevard, if you tear down the existing housing, about half of it is owned by minorities. If it's rental housing, they will not be coming back to the new housing because there's no requirement that the new housing is affordable. The one requirement was, they said if you build 3 houses instead of 2 houses, then the 3rd house has to be affordable to people as workforce housing, not to more deeply affordable housing, but workforce housing. Workforce housing caps out at incomes of about $172,000. I will point out that black and brown incomes are half the incomes of white and Asian people. So it sounds like we're addressing people at median income in Montgomery County, except for these other people whose median income is half that, and they will not be going back there. And when the planning director was confronted by a comment that what happens to these people who are going to get displaced, and he said, let's just find other housing. If Montgomery County had other housing readily available that was affordable, we wouldn't be in the mess in affordable housing that we're in today. So things continue in some ways the way they did before. It's important that you all be aware and sensitive to what's happening, that you think about the implications, that not be passive about things, even if they're not in your backyard. Because this is all of our backyard. And we want to make this, certainly I want to make this a better place. There is a path forward. And there are things we can concretely do that will make a difference. And I think it's our mission, should be all of our missions, to figure out what is the path forward How do we build something better? The two things I'm going to try to deal with in my last year, and one of them is a big project, but I think it's doable, is to find a location to actually build a history museum for African American history in Montgomery County. I know there's an interest in that. I've had proposals to build it in an out-of-the-way place. I don't want to build it in an out-of-the-way place. I want to put it in one of our downtowns. I want to put it in a place where people will see it, where it will be easy for people to come and see it, and where it's part of the fabric of the county. The other project I want to restore is there was a monument project that was started back when I was in the council, and that project got delayed, put aside, whatever, because of some internal disputes, and those were complicated. But I want to bring that back, because the goal was to put markers around the county so that people could see what happened and where it happened. And I think that's important for people to see, because most people walking, for example, in Silver Spring would have no idea the extent to which this place was covered in plantations only 150 years ago. And so there's an importance in this place to understand what you're sitting on, because what you're sitting on is very different than what you think it is. And this has not always been this way. It has been different. So I want to thank James Stowe for his unwavering work in this field. He's been an important partner for me in all of this. I want to thank the Reconciliation Commission Chair Treva Hopkins LeBoy and all the participating partners, such as the Montgomery County Lynching Memorial Project, MCPS, Button Farm, Arts and Humanities Council, Montgomery Parks, Josiah Henson History Museum and Park, Sandy Springs Slave Museum, Montgomery History, and Montgomery County College. All of these people are playing a role in enriching our knowledge of Montgomery County. We need, as leaders, to be willing to explain to people why we're doing this, so that they understand that, we understand other people's history much better than we understand what happened in Montgomery County. I used to be a history teacher at Maryland. I was a grad student. I got to teach history one semester in my own class with two grad students of mine. What you teach matters, and how you teach it matters. You have to teach in a way that people understand what you're doing, and the fact that you teach it matters. So I'm going to continue to do what I do, and I hope you all will continue to do what you do, and hopefully we'll continue to make progress here, and maybe we'll get to the point that we announce, hopefully, in the not too different future, because we're actually talking actively about a place to put the museum, that we can come together and talk about the museum and start bringing together the groups who will help plan the museum. So thank you all very much for being here today. Thank you for the work you do. You wouldn't be here on a day like this. This actually turned out to be halfway decent outside. You wouldn't be sitting here if this didn't matter. Thank you.
All right. Again, I'm going to thank again the county executive for those remarks. Let's thank him again by a round of applause, please. Okay. Our next task is to bring to the stage our panelists. So I'm going to ask them to come on up. You know who you are. So if you just come on up, panelists, now, and then we'll invite our moderator, who is going to formally introduce you, but they'll save us a step or two. So those of you who are panelists, if you will come on up to the stage, we'll get you squared away. Yes, you can go and have a seat.
We're not showing the film.
Yes, I want you guys to come on up.
Okay.
Thank you, though. My sister. As they're coming up and getting settled, we've got a short video we want to show from some of the work of the commission that might also lay the groundwork for this conversation that we're about to have. And so let's do that first, and I'll come back and then introduce our moderator, and we're ready then to go. So if you will, to our technical support folks, the video from, again, a clip at Channel 4. Channel 4's clip.
New tonight, President Trump's attempts to alter our view of history have hit a new inflection point. Now, signs of slavery may be removed from public view.
This is the result, reportedly, of an executive order President Trump signed back in March. First, the Trump administration targeted the Smithsonian museums. Last month, President Trump called the institution out of control, claiming everything discussed is about how horrible our country is and how bad slavery was, end quote.
The Washington Post reports the administration will review photography related to slavery in national parks. Now, the news comes as one Maryland county is determined more than ever to acknowledge its history of slavery and to protect the telling of that history. News 4's Jackie Benson has our story.
I'm in a county that, 100 and some years ago, was covered entirely pretty much with slave plantations. That's Montgomery County's history.
We spoke with Montgomery County Executive Mark Elrich, just a short distance away from a memorial at the site of the old Montgomery County Jail in Rockville, where the County Council building now stands. The memorial is less than 2 years old. It tells the stories of 2 of the 3 men known to be victims of racial terror lynchings in the years after the Civil War. It's the result of determined work by the Montgomery County Lynching Memorial Project. Their motto, Remembering is Resistance, and the Montgomery County Commission on Remembrance and Reconciliation. Elrich, a former teacher, says he considers it an absolute necessity to protect the right to tell Montgomery County's history of slavery and the documented racial injustice that continued into modern times.
If he thinks he can just obliterate it, it's not going to work. And it just kind of it heightens the kind of sense of despair that people have, that you've got a president who thinks he can create an imaginary world.
The education extends to the Montgomery County Parks Run Museum on the location of the plantation property in North Bethesda, where Reverend Josiah Henson lived in slavery. It is a place where visitors can learn about the life of the influential author and abolitionist, including his youth as an enslaved person. Education is also the driving force behind the Sandy Spring Slave Museum and African Art Gallery, a private nonprofit founded to highlight the heritage of Black families in Montgomery County. The Sandy Spring Slave Museum remains lovingly and thoughtfully managed by descendants of the original families. In Montgomery County, Jackie Benson, News 4.
Wrap up something special at the Downtown DC Holiday Market.
That was not part of the actual video, but I hope that really gives you a real good idea of some of the work of this commission, but also to our moderator and to our panelists, a real good sort of segue into what you all are going to kind of help us understand a little bit about, right? This whole issue of reconciliation and put before us recommendations and thoughts about how we all might be able then to embrace a concept that the county executive shared has been very difficult, have never happened in terms of the history of this county. And so we're excited to hear from you as well. She is the CEO and Arts and Humanities Council, CEO of the Arts and Humanities Council from Montgomery County. She's an educator. She's an artist in her own right. She holds an honorary degree in public service from Montgomery College, a BS in psychology and management, and an MBA from the University of Maryland. She is currently a fellow of the National Arts Strategy as a chief executive program. She's part of that piece as well. And she's been engaged in a process, I hope she'll say a word or two about, that's happening right here in the county that looks at this whole issue of how we do arts relative then to the cultural landscape for which we all live. I want to last say this, that she is the most thoughtful person I think I've met in a long time. You are. And I really appreciate you. I really, really do. We're blessed to have you here in our county. Ladies and gentlemen, please help me join again Suzanne Jenkins, CEO of the Arts and Humanities Council of Montgomery County. She'll introduce our panelists, and we'll go from there.
Thank you very much, Director Stowe. I am humbled at that introduction, but moreover, I'm humbled to be with you today to talk about the work of the Remembrance and Reconciliation Commission. I'm very proud to call myself a commissioner, to work with my fellow commissioners on this work, and to welcome you to our panel today entitled, What Does Reconciliation Mean to Me? So before I begin, I want to just say that I'm here with Delegate Charlotte Crutchfield. Delegate Crutchfield focuses on racial and social equity through her legislative service in the Maryland House of Delegates, a dedicated member of both the Legislative Black Caucus of Maryland and the Maryland Legislative Latino Caucus. Delegate Crutchfield contributes to justice reform as the chair of the Family and Juvenile Law Subcommittee and through her service on the Judiciary Committee. Her commitment to civil rights advocacy is further demonstrated by her previous roles as parliamentarian for the Potomac Valley Section, National Council of Negro Women, and as the NAACP Parents Council representative, Delegate Crutchfield. Professor Diane Orentlicker, how'd I do? All right. Is internationally recognized as a leading global authority on human rights and law and war crimes tribunals, placing her work at the forefront of global social justice. She's lectured and published widely on issues concerning international criminal law and transitional justice, which addresses accountability for historical inequities. Her public service roles underscore her commitment to justice, including her appointments as the United Nations Independent Expert on Combating Impunity and as the Deputy for War Crimes Issues in the U.S. Department of State, Professor Diane Orentlicker. Thank you. So I'm grateful to the county executive for setting the tone for the conversation today. Why do we even need reconciliation? Why do we even need remembrance? I mean, didn't that happen so long ago? How does it affect us? And so as I was thinking about the panel this week, as I was really thinking about the work that we had done from the Arts and Humanities Council side, I hope some of you saw the exhibition that we mounted several years ago called Certain Party or Parties Unknown. Why we named it that, because that was the most prominent term in all lynchings across all of America. Those lynchings were conducted by certain party or parties unknown. How do we even begin to talk about reconciliation? How do we even take these racial terrors and make sense of them in the world? So the question that we focused on when we began thinking about this panel and this day, what does reconciliation mean to you with the right attention, intention, and effort? So what I think all of us should do at any conference we go to, any panel meeting, is walk away with something that we can really use, something you can put right in your portfolio and say, I could do that. So there's a lot of racial terror that we could focus on, but today I'm really hoping that we can focus on some uplifting efforts that have been made across the globe and in our great state that help us understand what would it look like, what has it looked like successfully, and what could it look like in our great state to reconcile this terror and to move forward in a more equitable way. So Professor O, I'll ask you, in all of your experiences, where have you seen the right attention, the right intention, and the right effort towards reconciliation in your work?
Thank you. That's a great question. First, I want to say how happy I am to be here. Oh, I'm so sorry. Just, it works. You can hear me. Okay, great. It's an honor to be here. I have been working in the field of transitional justice. Does that term sound familiar? To you, okay. Let me give you a brief explanation of what it means in my field. It began as a self-conscious field about 40 years ago when many countries, starting in Latin America, started to see military dictatorships collapse. And these were dictatorships that had done horrific things to many, many people in a relatively concentrated time. And they collapsed of the own weight of their evil and were succeeded in one country after another by elected democracies. And the question that arose in one country after another is, what do we do about the past? How do we handle the legacy of atrocities? And in those instances, the worst atrocities were very recent. And so a whole field developed. It was a field of practice led by people like those of you in countries that were emerging from a nightmare, to try to come to terms with it. And the challenge for them was to, as the county executive put it, own the past, acknowledge what had been done in a country's name, and find a way to do right by victims, to provide real, meaningful redress without derailing the transition. So the name, transitional justice, evokes all of that. And the name reconciliation initially, to get to your question, as this phenomenon began to emerge, initially didn't have such a great name. It was a word that outgoing military dictatorships often invoked to justify amnestying themselves. If you prosecute us, things will unravel. Pinochet, the former dictator of Chile, threatened, if you touch one hair on the head of one of my men, the rule of law will come to an end. And so this word reconciliation was often invoked to say, really, if we want to move forward together as a country in peace without another military coup, you have to amnesty us, or actually you have to accept our amnesty in the name of reconciliation. So human rights advocates did not initially embrace that term in this context, but began to embrace it quite soon. It's widely believed, but inaccurately, that the South Africa Truth and Reconciliation Commission, led by the amazing, wonderful, inestimable Bishop Desmond Tutu, was the first commission to use the word reconciliation. It's widely believed that it was the first because it's a widely known and highly respected commission, and rightly so. But actually the first one to use the word reconciliation in its name was the National Commission on Truth and Reconciliation in Chile. I've already alluded to the threats from the former dictator Pinochet. Human rights activists and leaders and political leaders in Chile's transition knew they had a moral debt to discharge, and that redress was incumbent. And they also knew they had a duty to keep the country on the path forward rather than sending it back into the hands of Pinochet, who still had a lot of power and did have a lot of power for many years after the democratic transition. I think partly they were signaling to Pinochet, look, this is not something that's vengeful. This is something we can all live with, and we can do this, and we have to do it. And it was a gesture of conciliation, but it was also based on absolutely hard and determined principle. There was a lot of debate around the world, in fact, at that time, and Chile was part of it, about how hard to push for justice in those fragile moments of transition. And one of the most powerful voices in that global debate was a Chilean named Pepe Zalacat, who became a member of the National Truth and Reconciliation Commission, but also one of its chief architects. And as much as Pepe educated the rest of us about the risks of pushing too hard at a fragile moment, he said no compromise on the truth. There can be no compromise on the principle that we have to bring out the whole truth, no compromises about what happened. And from that foundation of truth, and importantly, acknowledgement, not just the facts, but acknowledgement, as the county executive said, owning what happened, and centering the victims in the national story. Only then can we call ourselves a basically moral country. South Africa, as I said, and as I think many of you know, made the concept of truth and justice more widely known. And one of the things that the South African Truth and Reconciliation Commission helped educate us about was the importance of centering victims. Many people in my field talk about truth commissions as being the approach to transitional justice, and there are many different approaches, but it's the one in which victims play a more central role. It is their voices that Desmond Tutu called on in the hearings of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. It was their voices that helped shape the mandate of the commission. So the idea of centering victims in the narrative and in the shaping of the policy of reconciliation itself, that the South Africa Commission gave us a model for, that many of us sort of took on and committed ourselves to elsewhere. I think I'll leave it there for now, but obviously there's lots to be said.
Thank you so much. So from that I took center the oppressed and tell the truth. Thank you. Delegate Crutchfield, in your work in our great state, you've done a lot of things to try to elevate the voice, to center the victims, and to make known what some would prefer remains unknown. Tell me, what does reconciliation mean to you with the right attention, intention, and effort through your work?
Well, thank you, first of all, for allowing me to be here. I really appreciate this opportunity. I'm Delegate Charlotte Crutchfield. I represent District 19 here in Montgomery County in the Maryland General Assembly. And so, as mentioned, yes, I've done a lot of work in the area as far as in particularly dealing with mass incarceration, because one of the things that I'm very, very concerned about is the effects of American slavery and what it did in particular to African Americans. And a part of that is, of course, the Black Codes. There's a lot of history about that. And as a result, we have also seen a lot of incarceration, and we're calling it mass incarceration in many states, including Maryland, where we have one of the largest populations of African Americans in our state incarcerated. Over 70% of our incarcerated people are African Americans, and we only make up 30% of the population of Maryland. So when I think of reconciliation, I think of many different things. I think about the ancestors and how we have actually come this far as a result of standing on their shoulders, and that we are really still the victims of all of the American slavery, all of the, which resulted in lynchings and other unfortunate things to African American people. So I think of the process as being a long, drawn-out process because there are just so many effects. I think about housing. I think about, as I mentioned, incarceration. I think about just the whole idea of wealth not being available generationally for African Americans. So I'm going to drop it right there because I'm sure you will have a lot of questions. And I hope this really does, I really hope this is a true conversation and that we're not just speaking here, but that you are also talking with us.
Thank you, Delegate Crutchfield. I have a question about this playpen to prison pipeline that you talked about. I'm interested to know how we are boldly looking at it in the state and what moves we've made toward that end.
Sure. So I want to talk a little bit about just incarceration in our state, period, okay? As I mentioned, we have over 70% of our incarcerated people are made up of African Americans. And I think one of the greater concerns I have with that is clearly that we in the state can do more. Right now, we have done some things around sentencing guidelines to reduce those so that those people that are incarcerated are not being overly taxed with prison terms, especially when they are for nonviolent offenses, like your marijuana offenses. And we've done a great job in that, with actually now being one of the few states that has both medical and recreational marijuana is no longer a criminalized situation for people. So I think that's a large step in the right direction. And also along with that, actually creating a fund that will allow people to get funding to create businesses and other things in those communities where they were targeted and disadvantaged by the fact that there was this cannabis in their communities. So there are things like that have gone on that we are attempting to do. I serve on the Judiciary Committee. My focus is right now really on the younger people that are going through the criminal justice system and ensuring that we don't criminalize them, because juvenile justice should be and has always supposed to have been about rehabilitation. It is not about locking up little kids. And so I strongly have some concerns about that. And in fact, this particular session coming up, there's going to be some legislation that I hope everybody will be involved in supporting, and that is to not automatically charge youth with adult offenses. We got to make sure our children come in the right way. Decisions can be made after that, but they have got to come into the criminal justice in the right way to get all the services that they need. So I'll stop there again.
All right, thank you so much. So from that conversation, I'm taking away policy and legislative fixes and enhancements when we see legislation that has caused harm.
Yes.
Thank you so much. Director Stowe, I'm certain that in your career, both here and when you worked in Memphis, you've seen a lot. As the director of the Human Rights Commission here in Montgomery County, I'm certain you've seen even more. So talk to me about that lens, if you would. And if you could paint a picture of nirvana, which I say often to my colleagues, what would the right attention, intention, and effort look like right here in Montgomery County to address what you've seen and what you see coming down the pike?
I think for me, there we go. I think for me, the essence of this work really is about always evolving. I entered this work with a very, very different perspective on where I am today, and not just in the age and those kind of things, having made that change, but also having had the experiences. And because of the job, I've had to involve myself with a lot of different communities, a lot of different cultures, a lot of different religious groups. I've had exposure to a lot of different things that I never ever would have seen or thought I would have seen when I grew up in North Carolina. So part of that has been a willingness to evolve. Because as a young person coming into this work, initially there was already this pent-up anger at what I had experienced. Because I knew what it was like then to have to step down off the sidewalk when white people came along the sidewalk. It was not something I read about.
You did it.
I saw it, and I actually did it. I was encouraged to do it because, again, that would keep me safe.
Absolutely.
And the talk that you all can hear about in terms of driving, well, we had the talk about walking in neighborhoods for which you're not familiar with, in particular if they were white. So that was the backdrop for which I evolved from. And I had someone tell me one time that they were probably most concerned about anything else. And this is why they were really fearful of really addressing some of the issues of the past. They were fearful of retaliation. Because what they said was, there is no way that I could have those same things happen to my family historically and be okay with it today. There's no way. I would have to respond in some kind of way that might show them that ownership of what was taken away from me in terms of those experiences that were mostly negative to my family. That I drew this additional concern about where I was. So I moved in to a point where what I've seen before, what I'm now seeing in Montgomery County is we have the wherewithal to really act boldly about trying to change the fabric of of this country that we live in today, starting here in Montgomery County. But there is not a willingness, I'm not so sure what it is, to take that next bold step to reconcile. I've got to be courageous enough as being the person who believes himself to be a victim of the situation, to not only be okay with the fact that, yes, it happened, yes, those things occurred, but what now is your position? And you don't have to feel like, and beg my pardon about this, folks, I'm using this term, you don't have to feel like a punk about it, that you gave in, that somehow or another you are doing something less than upholding your own sort of sense of who you are, your identity and who you are, to be able to reconcile with anybody. And by the way, that reconciliation goes not just to what we're talking about, it also goes between you and your family members and other relationships. But being able to accept that. And so that's been a struggle for me. And I believe in Montgomery County, that's also the struggle. Is how do we get to the point of being able to hear my story and hear all of it and all of its brutality and pain and suffering and all those things, at the same time realizing that, yes, while you didn't have a particular role in it, you have benefited from it. And so therefore, you share in it. And so, Madam Moderator, I believe then to get to the other side, there's going to be a need for persons to evolve from where they have been through intentional experiences where you are intentionally finding yourselves in unfamiliar territory, uncomfortable territory, from a racial and a cultural and religious perspective, to at least gain an understanding, not talking about a conversion process. I'm just talking about getting exposure and understanding before we're able to get to a point where we can truly be nirvana. Nirvana simply looks like never ever being invisible. Folks, to feel invisible is so belittling to us as human beings, not to be seen. So, Madam Moderator, never to be invisible, be recognized, and to be uplifted for who I am and who you are and your God-given potentiality. That's nirvana.
Thank you, Director Stone. Centering the victims, centering the oppressed, being seen, seeing others, recognizing the pipeline, making it plain, understanding that this is a journey and a long one. Seems right. You know, when I first started doing the work, what was really incredible to me is a really understanding that no matter who you are racialized. You are racialized in ways that you may not even recognize, whether it's language, whether it's the way that you're allowed to attend a school, whether it's the church you go to or don't go to, the concept that there's not enough, the scarcity mindset, the concept that dominant culture knows better than you yourself may know, all of these tenets of supremacist dominant culture mindset have racialized us all in ways that may even be invisible to me myself, not to mention members of my family, members of my community, legislators, pastors, doctors, nurses, everyone. So how do we get there? How do we go from what we feel in our gut, in our heart, and understand in our head to be the thing that must be done in order for us to evolve to a greater plane, to be the utmost best self we could possibly be? How are we going to get there? And I'm just going to open that to the panel.
So I want to just use the words of Director Stowe really quickly, and that is bold steps. And to do that, you have to really step out and make a bold, bold statement. And I think that one of the things that I'm proud of is that the Montgomery County delegation did that this last session. I sponsored legislation to deal with an issue that has been predominant in a community, an African-American community here in Montgomery County called Emory Grove. That community went through the very first efforts at urban renewal. And I'm just going to say efforts because the community was demolished as a result of urban renewal. And it is one that never was able to come back as a community. When you talk to the survivors, and that's who they are, it is clear that they have gone through a dramatic trauma as a result of what happened to the over 108 homes there, families that were displaced, never ever to come back, but only to the church that is the remaining piece of that community. And so by boldness, I mean Montgomery County delegation voted, along with my 7 co-sponsors, who were all of the members of the Legislative Black Caucus, also voted and co-sponsored the bill to actually form a task force to understand what happened in Emory Grove, to come up with recommendations about what to do next. This is bold. That is what I call bold, to step out and do that. And you should be proud of your Montgomery County delegation for doing that. Because, believe it or not, during the same time, the state had a reparations bill to form a commission to look at the entire state at what happened as a result of this American slavery in Maryland. That bill passed both the House and the Senate, but was vetoed by our governor. But, however, the bill for Montgomery County, Emory Grove, was passed, and we are currently working on the task force to really do that. And there are several members here. And in fact, I'd like for them to stand up, if they would, to just so you can see who the members of this task force are. Because this is an important task force. It is the only one in the state, and it is going to be truly a model of what to do next. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, so again, center the community, make it plain, legislative fixes.
So just to add a couple of thoughts from the perspective of the work I'm doing. First of all, I've been trying to think about lessons from other countries that are useful here, but you guys are doing the things that are the lessons learned from other countries. You're doing it. You're taking bold steps. You're finding the unredressed history, and you're doing something about it. You're not talking about it. You're doing it. But a couple of things. To your question about how do you didn't put it this way, but the way I think of it is, how do you get white people to reckon with responsibility for slavery and its long legacies and its deep tendrils? It's something I think about and work on all the time, and it's a daunting question. I'm working on a piece right now about the law of slavery, and I don't know how to summarize it quickly, so I'm just going to leave it there. When people ask me what I'm working on now, people who usually ask me follow-up questions about my work change the subject, or say something like, well, as long as it's got some relevance for today and contemporary, and they just don't get it, It's a huge, huge challenge. But one of the areas, and this is something that is, but so I'm not giving up on this for my part. It's something that's, to me, the most important issue that I can try to make a contribution on. One of the things that I have seen in other countries and in this country is that the arts are such an important venue for change, because you're talking about culture shifts. You're talking about not just changing the law, so that's all important. I'm a lawyer, have been a law professor for decades. I know how important they are, but the cultural shift is so hard. And in the last decade or two, the field that I'm part of has finally realized how important the cultural breakthroughs are. It's really hard to come up with a formula for what's going to make it work, but when we see it happen, it's amazing. I don't know if any of you will remember this, but last year there was a film about a family in which somebody was disappeared in Brazil, and it was about the efforts of the person's wife to establish his fate and accountability for what happened. It's called I'm Still Here. There was a front page article in the New York Times about how that film was transforming Brazil's receptiveness to reckoning with that period in its past. And to me, it's both astonishing and not surprising that that happened, that a cultural intervention, which was not expected to have this impact, did. It changed the conversation and opened up new avenues for redress that hadn't existed before. One of the wisest people I know in my field, who had a long-running UN mandate on transitional justice, in his final work during his mandate, he wanted to elevate our understanding of the importance of cultural interventions, the work you do all the time, in creating guarantees for the future, is how he put it. That's because that's transitional justice speak. He was saying, yes, all those institutional changes we've been working on for decades matter, they're important, but they're not going to bring about a culture shift that we need if we're going to have a different future than the past we've been living through. And so he devoted a lot of his work in his final period as the Special Rapporteur on Transitional Justice, addressing how we can support those cultural initiatives. His successor in that role talked about something that you all have been an integral part of, which is what we in the field internationally call memorialization. You use the word remembrance. It's the same thing. How do we introduce a wider and wider and wider part of our population to the notion that we have to not only know, but remember in a meaningful way, in a way that involves inclusion and action and movement forward? How do we do those acts of remembrance? So all of the initiatives you are part of and are doing right now are exactly what it took my field kind of decades to figure out are crucial. And the last thing I'm going to say, which is, again, obvious and well known to you, is that internationally we tended to see the big gestures, the bold gestures, as happening nationally. We were all looking for the next Bishop Desmond Tutu to lead another Truth Commission or another leader like Nelson Mandela. And of course, there is no one else like Nelson Mandela. But we thought the path forward was in those bold steps. That's the goal. That's the hope. We have to work toward it, commit toward it. But in fact, a lot of the progress and a lot of the meaningful initiatives are local, and that is absolutely true in this country. We are not a deeply introspective country. We are not a country nationally that likes to deal with its dark past. We like to celebrate our heroic moments. And the most meaningful progress in this country has been, and for a long time will be, at more local levels. And that's not a failure. That's a strategic success. It's the way forward. So again, in so many ways, I congratulate you for the work you're doing. It's vital, and it's important in more places than here.
Thank you so much for that. I hope that you took away from what Professor O just told us is this idea of hyperlocal, this idea that all politics is local. I'm sure you've heard that phrase before. And that planting those seeds, sowing those seeds, nurturing those seeds right there in your community, lifting up the voice right from the community. If your community does it, and your community does it, and your community does it, pretty soon you'll see how those communities unite. On my way here today, I was listening to a podcast about one of my favorite artists on the planet, Fela Anikulapo Kuti, and really talking about Femi's work in Nigeria and the consciousness he brought to a corrupt government. I'm thinking about the time that I've spent in South Africa with our colleagues who told us that the freedom songs that have been sung in America inspired the work in South Africa. I know that the arts are an incredible vehicle for telling the truth when others would prefer that the truth not be told. And I'm really proud, Director Stowe, of the work that we've done together, integrating the arts with this work. And now you're serving on a committee that we are working on together to develop this new cultural plan. And the cultural plan is not just about frilly tutus. There's some people that think that that's what I do all day, as I just deal with frilly things. But what we deal with are sometimes hard facts. So tell me, Director, what kinds of things can we put together when we kind of join all of our efforts together? What kind of bold moves can we make?
I think one of the things that jumps out at me is that I said a minute ago in my earlier comments about this issue of evolving, and the other word used then, I'm using it again, and that is being intentional. Even if we have to choreograph, even if we've got to steer, in a positive way, by the way, to this steering word, to involve us in activities that we would not normally be involved in. Because you cannot walk away from that experience without it affecting you. You may choose not to, in fact, have it move you a particular way or not, but you can never unsee something. It's hard to unhear something, and it clearly is very difficult to unfeel something. And so that, to me, is the opportunity that we have to move from where we are to someplace different. When we have events in this community right now, events that involve various cultural communities, if it is an Asian event, only Asians are going to attend, by and large. If it is an event then centered around another different cultural group, guess who's in the audience? Guess who attends? One of those groups. And not only are they the ones that end up attending, what people say is that I didn't think that was for me. And so it's got to get to a point where, again, these opportunities to engage in ways, and particularly in Montgomery County, where your life is not on the line if you happen to be in a part of town, right, that's unfamiliar. In some places in America, that may not be the case. But in Montgomery County, it is the case. And so I'm just simply saying, again, Madam Moderator, that we've got to be able to move to a place where we see ourselves differently and also we begin to act differently. And that's the thing I think probably is the most difficult thing for many of us to do. We see what needs to be done, but we very seldom take the next step and actually act out what it is that we believe needs to be done. I think that's the opportunity that still lies before us, and I hope that we finally see a place where we can move that to a different kind of thought process. Let me give you one more example real quickly. We have a race equity program. You heard the county executive talk about the racial equity and social justice program. We're one of the few, by the way, in the nation who put the word racial in front of the word equity. One of the few. I think there's probably maybe 2 or 3. Everyone else went a very different direction. And they have equity programs. But the racial equity program would have you then look through the filter of a race perspective first, regardless of what the race may be, to get to where the real opportunity for change and improvement needs to occur. And one of our biggest challenges in Montgomery County on the racial equity program is I do not want to wait until the actual service goes to someone else, because I am used to always getting my turn and receiving that service. Not that we have a chance really to do something about the overall problem, but I'm not getting my fair share, I believe, of the resources. And wouldn't it be a different world if we just tried to solve the problem? Solve the problem. And bring everybody to that particular problem who has anything to add, resource-wise or skill-wise or intuitive-wise, whatever it is that you bring by way of your gifts to solving problems. You are allowed to participate fully in a way that the whole benefits from all your collective efforts.
Delegate Crutchfield, there's a lot that disturbs me in the world, but the playpen to prison pipeline is absolutely one of the most. Having had family members affected by that mindset, and just seeing so many brothers and sisters on the planet subjected to that too. What is the bold move that our state needs to make in that regard?
Well, there's a lot of bold moves that I think we could make. I think one thing that we just need to really recognize is that we have to have more wraparound services within our communities. We need to start with and really make sure that we impact our school systems with that. So in other words, right now we have something called the blueprint, which is our sort of guidance on how our school system should receive funding, et cetera. Part of that talks about our youngest children, our 3-year-olds, our 4-year-olds, and how we need to make sure that they get those pre-kindergarten services. I think those are the kind of bold moves I think that we have to take. We have to make sure that our children are equipped. They know, they can read, they can write, so that they don't get distracted by other things. Make sure that our children go to school. We have a huge truancy issue. You know, what is happening? We need to get to that. We need to get to all of those things and also provide a lot of services right there in the schools. The mental health services, we need to have health services, all those things that really truly can make a child successful. Making sure we understand what their housing is. That affects them in school. There are so many pieces to this. And I think we have to start at the beginning, you know. We have to really provide and make sure that they are going to get all the things they need to be successful so that they do not move into other directions, get distracted, that there's misunderstandings about what's happening. And the other piece, too, is there needs to be a lot of cultural competence, training within our schools. I will tell you, my son went through MCPS. The first time he came in contact with a teacher that looked like him was as a junior in high school, when he took a science class. Believe it or not, all the same year, he had a black male science teacher, engineering teacher, and also math teacher. And I cannot even begin to tell you what the influence was on him, and in particular with the engineering teacher, who came in every day with a suit on, every day asked all the young men in the class, I know you're interested in going to college, and if you're not, tell me, what are you going to do? Tell me the schools you're interested in. It's those kinds of impactful things that matter so much to our young people. So I think that's where we got to start.
I love that. Enhanced wraparound services. Again, prioritizing legislative fixes, policy fixes that can make a difference. All right, Professor? I know you've heard everyone think about their bold ideas. What bold ideas have you seen, or what is your nirvana for what we might do?
Well, that's obviously a great question and an important one. To be honest with you, I do think, I tend to think more about taking the spaces that are right before you when you run into roadblocks for the bold ideas. So of course, in terms of my nirvana, it's a very different place than where this country has ever been. The idea is so obvious, I don't need to say it here, but I would like to see an inclusive society where everybody has a genuine opportunity to thrive, and where people who haven't had the opportunities from birth are given resources to thrive going forward. But in terms of how you get there, I think it's important to have a plan, to take the bold moves when you can, because windows open when you don't expect them, often out of tragedy, as happened with George Floyd and has happened in so many countries in the world. My whole field is built on opportunities, moments of opportunity, moments of where change is possible that come out of moments when we recognize that we've fallen over the abyss. All that's a preface, though, for saying, but on the planet that I live in, it's desperately important to create openings where they don't exist and to move forward and find points of entry and pressure points that are within reach at every step of time. And I'm constantly struck by the ingenuity of this region in creating those opportunities. For example, these are really minor things, so it's the opposite of what you really asked me about. But in, I think it was Arlington, Virginia, someone realized that her ancestors' history of enslavement, where she lived, was nowhere acknowledged, nowhere recognized, even though she was walking in their footsteps every day. So she, inspired by, I'm going to mispronounce this, but the I can't even do it. Somebody say that louder. Who just said it? Yes, stumbling stones. I should just say the English. Thank you. In Germany, could be adapted, and so she helped generate a movement in Arlington to have these stumbling stones that recognize the places where slaves created the whole infrastructure of Arlington, created the foundations for it to thrive. And the idea of stumbling stones is not that you fall. It's not that you stumble over it in a way that you can't recover from. It means you stop and recognize something important has happened here. And you want to find out about it. You want to engage with it. You want to recognize the meaning and then ask yourself the next question. What do I do about this? What more do I need to learn? How can I be an agent of change too? And so to me, what I think about more than the big thing, although of course I think about the big thing all the time, you have to in the field of human rights, is how do we move? What's our next step? How do we move? Keep moving. How do we keep moving? And ideally not provoke. There will always be backlashes. There will always be setbacks, but not to provoke the backlash that erases the progress you've made and that gives you more space to move forward. And I would love to see more people outraged by what that video showed. There are no words to capture how outrageous the current national policy of erasure is. It's toxic, it's pernicious, it's inherently evil. I'd like to see more people get that and do something about it. But in the short term, there's always, always, always something you can do. And again, I point to the arts. Be innovative about it. The innovations are what get people's attention and change minds.
Thank you. So there, incremental steps, intention, those are the bold moves. You know, sometimes I see a building, I see something and I think, wow, I wish I had done that. I wish I had made that a piece of art that I'm madly in love with. Why didn't I think that up? But the truth is that everything starts with a small idea, a small intention, a tiny spark. Be that spark. Think of how to be an ally, to uplift, to support. Be that spark. And I think that when we think about the bold ideas, they start with just the spark of an idea. And I think that is how we can get to the bold ideas that will get us to the nation, the county, the neighborhood that we want to live in and thrive. So I wanted to open it up to questions for the panelists. Director Stowe, are you coming back? Okay. So if anybody has any questions, we do have breakout sessions that we had planned this afternoon, but if there's any burning question you have for the panelists, speak now. There's some mics in the aisles there. Please come to the mic, identify yourself. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Charles McCree. I live here in Silver Spring. And I want to say first, I appreciate what I believe, what I've heard and read, that this panel is trying to do to create change for Montgomery County. And I've taken a lot of notes, but I'm going to try to summarize in the form of a question. But I want to share a belief to preface my question. So I have this kind of belief that I use. I call it the stop sign belief system. And it deals with when someone pulls up to a stop sign, they have a choice. They can either stop or keep going. If there's nobody watching, no one's checking, it's just their choice. But if they believe the reason the stop sign is there and the system that placed it, most people are going to stop. I think this remembrance and reconciliation process has the same challenge with people's belief. We're trying to get people who either choose to stop or go to either stay the way they are or change for something that they see as better. My question is there something that can be presented either through this program, through this council, or some other way that can give the everyday person a way to change their belief if for some reason they believe they should keep going the way they are rather than change, and something that can be either provided on your website or presented to the public that can help individuals help themselves and others make the better choice? That's my question.
Let me just address it if I can real quickly, because part of what we're going to do with our program coordinator today, Tamara Williams, is to talk about from you, our community, and others who would have signed on to our survey to help us understand here in Montgomery County, what does what does reconciliation actually look like? We're not trying to suggest then that we have any and all the answers by any means. And thank you for that beautiful, beautiful analogy, sir, as well. May I use that, by the way? Is that Arthur? Thank you, sir. I appreciate you allowing me to do that, because I am going to use it. I am. But at any rate, I think in terms of how we look at this from the perspective of what it's going to take to get to it, first of all, we've got to figure out what it is, and we don't know that yet. We're hoping you're going to help us find that out. And then secondly is that what are going to be the steps to carrying out whatever it is we come up with? And so I'm not giving you an answer to the question. I'm asking, just trying to ask some additional questions once we kind of get to that point. But we'd love for you, somebody like yourself, sir, and others to be involved to help us really move beyond just this concept to a reality, at least a suggested reality for this community.
Yes.
Great evening. I think it's evening anyway. Happy Servant Leadership Saturday. My name is Kelly Dominique Hudson.
Speak it to the mic, yeah.
Is it on?
Is it up a little bit?
It's
Yeah,
on,
yeah.
it's on, but you just have to, yeah.
Testing.
There we go.
That's it.
Yeah, that's it.
Happy Servant Leadership Saturday. I'm Kelly Dominique Hudson, and today we've talked about several things that raised my antennas. We talked about centering people closest to the harm. We talked about shaping policies of reconciliation. We talked about domestic and international human rights law. We talked about war crimes. When we think about remembrance and reconciliation of the atrocities of American chattel slavery, even if we as African Americans have access to greater education attainment, home ownership, black banking, financial literacy, housing, physical and mental health services, the truth is, without existing wealth through existing assets and resources, i.e. some form of reparations, monetary reparations, Black Americans can't truly reap the benefits of this nirvana that you all speak of. There was a study that was done in 2023. The name of the study is What We Get Wrong About Closing the Racial Wealth Gap. It speaks about how African Americans in this country only account for 15% of the nation's wealth, whereby white Americans account for 85%. So how can we have a discussion about this ideological nirvana without addressing those things?
Thank you for that question. And I think, as Dr. Stowe said, the panel today was really the perspectives of the panelists, but I would also say that we don't have the answers either. And your perfect articulation of how the wealth gap and disparity in America has been engineered in a way to constantly keep those who were disenfranchised in the first place, to keep us continually disenfranchised, is at the core of, I think, the issue. So I'm hoping that today, in the breakout sessions, people can come up with ideas that the county might consider in order to move us forward to the nirvana. But without that, I understand and agree that that disparity will continue. Thank you for acknowledging that.
Thank you.
Any other questions before we start our breakout sessions? All right, we'll take this one last question so that then we can get into the breakout sessions. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Cheryl Rosette Chapman, resident Silver Spring, downtown Silver Spring. And Charlotte may have heard me, but recently I reviewed the 1888 speech by Frederick Douglass, a Republican talking to the Congress, who speaks to the fraudulent proclamation Emancipation Proclamation. He said it was fraudulent. 25 years later, he points out that it is really economic, in the sense that the family unit is the smallest unit of our society. And if the family unit cannot support itself, feed itself, the society can't thrive. And he went on to talk about two things that I heard in your panel, and I do have a question, that I heard in this panel. The two things he talked about is the systemic unwillingness of the society, and we do know that many of the original congressional folks were slave owners, but the unwillingness to allow the freed slave to be able to participate and earn enough money to put any side aside. And that those who rebelled or those who were captured not compliant with the culture of the day were in the chain gang. So you were sharecroppers, you were chain gang members, and you worked always for the storekeeper. You were always earning money for someone else. Nothing has changed. 50% of black children born in this country are born poor. So my question to you is, and I like it, and I have my academic background, and I think it's very important to do symbolism because it creates a mythology that serves people. But sometimes we get so into the symbolism. Our Jewish colleagues have talked about you must tell the truth before you forgive. As a Christian, I've been told basically you're supposed to forgive. But what is the truth that we must tell? And I would ask you, do you think that there is some challenge to the fact that we have such diverse, and I would say some harm from liberal notions of language and symbolism that doesn't speak to the fact that black people do not have enough to support and feed their families. If in fact, Delegate Crutchfield, and if in fact the assumption is that if black folk had the money, they would not wrap around the supports for their children, they would not get the tutors, they would not have the housing. If they had the money, would they not make the same choices? So 50% of black children in this country are born poor. Help me with that. How does this get envisioned in your decision to focus on it when we're so varied in our approach to it and so liberal, academic, conceptually sounding? But the bottom line is they're born poor.
Thank you.
Well, sorry, it's laryngitis, but I'm also really moved by your question, which gets to the heart of the question of how we bring about change on the part of people who are not even remotely close to being allies yet. And I don't have the answer to that. I hope you guys figure it out in the sessions. I am acutely aware that in many different settings, there are moments when people's eyes are opened and they can finally grasp something that they have refused to be even interested in for a long time. That's not the whole answer. There are lots of people who don't need to be informed to be able to move forward with the programs you're advancing. And I've said several times that the arts can play a role in bringing about those moments. I spend a lot of time educating my liberal friends about things that they resist understanding about why they think their white children are having a harder time getting admitted to elite schools. I give them, those who need arguments and data, I give them all of that. And I know how hard it is to change minds. I do believe you can do that. I don't know how to do it on a global level except to, again, be ready for those moments when eyes open. And in the meantime, come up with creative ways to engage. But you're absolutely right. It's a real, you put your hand on the heart of it. It's the biggest challenge, and I don't know how to solve it. I know that I work on it on the level of my own work and the level of the people I encounter. and the arguments that persuade or the experiences that persuade. I know how hard it is, but that's not an answer to your question.
I'm not trying to put you in the spot. I was
No,
just
you
say-
should.
I was
It's
just,
absolutely
I was just
essential.
simply saying to your friends who talk about the admission, I'm on a board of a Ivy League school. The original ones, the old ones, they were built by the slaves.
Of course.
And when Ruth, the president of Brown, created the movement for them to figure out that they were raised, fixed, built by slaves, they then began to give money to black students particularly. And now it's called, we can't do that anymore with this private money, but they were giving back what they owed. And so to the folks who want their kids admitted, can you go somewhere else? You didn't build this. Can you go somewhere else?
Yeah.
But you're going to take the money away. So I'm just saying we get off on the money. They built those places. They
Right.
built those schools.
Absolutely.
They built them
Right.
with no benefit.
Right. We understand.
It's that, and also, again, because I'm a lawyer, and I think you were getting at this,
Right.
we also constructed laws immediately
Absolutely.
with emancipation to make
Absolutely.
it nearly impossible
To
for
realize.
right for
dream.
people who had been enslaved to begin to build wealth.
Right.
You know, we passed vagrancy laws in the South so that if somebody who wanted to leave the plantation where they had been enslaved and find a job couldn't leave without getting arrested for vagrancy. And so many of them ended up working for their former enslavers in the conditions you've described. No, you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. And we have our work cut out for us, and it's, I think, the most important work of the day.
I would agree. Thank you for your questions. Thank you for being here. We're going to now move into some discussion groups, and Tamara, you want to talk about that?
Sure. Good afternoon, everyone. So we are getting ready to start our breakout sessions. So we're going to stay within the same room, but I will announce the session, and then you go to that particular space. So for the discussion on reparations and innovative strategies, we're going to meet right here on the left. For the policy discussion, we're going to meet in the back, going to be led by Councilmember Jawando and Stephanie Joseph, and the reparations discussion will also be held by Brandon Stuckey and Dr. Jean Tungara. Right, so reparations and innovative strategies to the left, through policy in the back, through education, we're going to meet right here in the middle, education and historical markers. For anybody wanting to have a discussion about reconciliation through the arts, we will meet to the right. So whenever you're ready, move to your particular locations. So policy will be in the back.
Folks, as you're moving to your various selected spots, remember, we do have a reception afterwards, so please hang around for some good food. So please stay with us. Also, let me make sure we recognize Councilmember Will Jawando is here. And so we want to recognize him in the back there as well. So thank you, Councilman, for being here as well. And we'll have a chance, hopefully, have him participate if his time allows and be able to share something with us once we come back together.
And thank you to our panel, to our panelists, to our Director Stowe, to our moderator, Susan Jenkins.
when the government was we were trying to manage all the distribution of both testing and vaccine, we found that people in the community had deeper reach in the community than the county government did. And people had more trust in some cases